Just a little technology check. I like to always check my technology first. Very good. Yes, so I'm Barry Nickerson, and I'm actually hailing from St. Louis, Missouri, where I currently live, and work as a remote employee for Kale's Heartland office. Kale's out of Chicago, Illinois. They've been around for about 44 years, and they've really been the pioneers of prior learning assessment, but are also some just very loud, active voices in the room for the last 44 years around effectively serving adults. So with that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about adult learners, but first of all, I wanted to take a quick moment and just ask, I know this is a tough time, we are in between a break and lunch. They're going to bring you food. It's going to smell good. We're going to smell those sandwiches. You're going to smell whichever one of the four you picked on the back of your tag. I was tempted to check all 4 boxes. You were allowed to do that, I was going to, I play rugby, so I'm like, I'm hungry. You got to feed the bear, okay? So, but anyways, I'm just wondering, who all in this room was an adult learner themselves? For your undergraduate, that is so many of you. So we know that not only are we not alone, but we are in good company. So I came to Kale out of working in workforce intermediary between higher education and healthcare industry in the state of Rhode Island, but I went to college as an undergraduate as an adult learner. And I worked up to 70 hours per week while attending my undergraduate classes, working multiple jobs, including one full-time job that was my primary 40-plus hours a week in retail, scrubbing floors with magic erasers at a Restoration Hardware in the Providence Place Mall. And I actually experienced failure in higher education because I had to prioritize work over school because for long story short, I effectively lost my parents when I was 17 years old. So I had to work harder than most of my peers, and I had to struggle very hard to try to have the traditional student experience. And I found that when I was trying to prioritize my classes, and when I was trying to, I was a math major, so I'm like, oh, I have to do all this work, I have Calc 3, I have to figure out with all this technology and stuff, and I had no time to go to the math lab, and I would talk to work, and they would say, talk to HR, talk to HR, talk to HR. So by the time I failed out of the math program, I decided to talk to HR, and I went to the Rhode Island College's School of Management's Human Resources Department. Because I figured that's what talking to HR means, right? I work in retail. And I actually ended up changing my major to HR. And those classes happened at night. They had their own extended support services right in Elger Hall where I had my classes, and I was able to finish. But it did take 7 years. I attempted over 200 credits and only finished about 120 of them because I had to drop so many classes due to wearing myself out, illnesses, or prioritizing work over school. So as you can imagine, that's just one story among many. There are about 150 of us in here, something like that, and a lot of you are adult learners, all of who have had struggles. Some of you have had children, and for many of you, you were first in your families to finish. And it is impressive and it is commendable work. So congratulations to everyone in the room for finishing a difficult academic journey, no matter what your journey was. I just talked a little bit about this winding path to adult student success. When you have multiple priorities conflicting with school, but you know that to get out of where you are at and to be in a better place where you don't need to have so many hours on the job, where you can spend more time with your family, you have to make sacrifices now. And you have to navigate this difficult college experience that's really designed, for all intents and purposes, for that traditional student who lives on campus or who commutes from a little while away but lives with parents who feed them 3 meals a day, 3 nutritious meals a day. And you just have, maybe you have kids, maybe you have grandkids, maybe your parents are disabled. So you have just all of these things getting in the way, but you know that what you want to do is you want to finish so that way you can make a better life for them. So at Kale, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, and yes, it's Kale, it's not spelled with a K-L-E, it is Kale. That's who we are. I thought it was Ka-El, I thought it was like Superman, it's like Kal-El. 501c3 nonprofit, we're in it to win it, but not for the money. We're here to help you. We are all about adult learner success and what we can do as a partner between you as higher education institutions and each other, but also your state and the employers in your state and the communities you support and serve. Your adult learners matter to us, but also your struggles too. And we want to help you scale your resources. Scalability is key, so that way you can effectively serve your adults without having to put yourselves, we're looking at a lot of red numbers on our budget sheets, in higher ed, especially here in the Rust Belt. So we don't want to put you in a position where to serve your adults you have to get rid of something else. We want to make this scalable, we want to help you make this successful. A little bit of what we do is we're an integrator. So this is, I love the conversations, I love hard conversations between people that don't get along, which is why I'm at Kale. We are an intermediary between some of the biggest wigs in the room with the biggest heads, and then higher ed. And some of us have a little bit too, but that's who we are. We all want what's best for the people we support and we serve in higher education, especially in nonprofit and public higher education, as 2 and 4 year institutions. We're about community outcomes. So we do work with government entities, philanthropers, trying to develop some funding so that way we can generate interest around supporting programs that support the adult learner. This is what Kale does, and we're here to help you with that, because sometimes there are institutions out there that are really interested in moving that needle on adult learner success, and if you know they're there and the grant's there, we can send you a note and say, hey, you have this great program. Labor unions as well, because we also have to include the employers, we have to include the employees too. So we have to make sure it's manageable. So why adults? A little bit of this is review, so I'm going to gloss over the numbers, but we know that we have quite a bit of work to do to really get up to speed. The slice of pie of high school graduates is shrinking, but the number of adults who don't have a credential but have some degrees continues to grow. We've talked a little bit about Ohio already. Actually, we've talked a lot about Ohio. So we're going to, I'm going to actually just skip over that slide and just go right to what Kale's doing about it. So Kale is working to reverse this trend. We know that the student loan debt of students who enroll is, the average is over $30,000 now. So we're talking about a lot of debt. I graduated with $82,000 of student debt and worked full time. So I can only imagine what it's like to have kids and a spouse to support while going to school. It is difficult. So we're looking at that and we're saying, if they don't have a credential and they have all this debt, they said it earlier, that's a credential. It is humiliating to carry that with you. And then to see your peers advance in life, get their house, they have a car that the decade year starts with 1, mine starts with 0. So it's a great Honda, it gets through the snow. We touched on some of these statistics, and this is a very big slide, so we'll be sure to have these slides available for you so you can scrutinize them more carefully on your own. But we know that demographics are shifting in higher education, and there are more adults coming to our doors, and in some cases, maybe it's not even the more adults, but the ratio is starting to look a little bit different, and we have more empty seats than usual. So we're really getting concerned about how do we fill these seats, because every lost seat, that's really, when you have that 15 out of your 20 chairs filled in your classes, that's money that you're losing out on, is those 5 seats. And our modern learners are overwhelmed. We are bombarded with technology, we are bombarded with communication, all of us in this room, even as workers. And you add on school to that, and the demand for immediate response can be overwhelming, especially if you work the type of job where your employers can get a hold of you after hours and expect a response. So we're really trying to focus on school, but when you're in online school, your Twitter alert could go off if you're a social media person, or your Gmail could go off, and there's an email from mom asking when she's going to see the kids, or could be anything. It could be a bill, it could be a late due notice, it could be a lone person calling, it could be a spam call. All of these little things are just infiltrating our lives and pulling us away from the concentration that we need to spend focused time on school. So we need to be adaptive to that. And then when we look at our outcomes in the end, we've talked about how these numbers look different for different racial and ethnic groups. So we are looking at the social justice aspect of this as well, and I'm so glad we talked about those persons who are or have been incarcerated. I'm going to bounce over that because we are here really to talk about the 10 principles for effectively serving adults. These are principles that Kale has developed over time in partnership with research agencies, including the National Council on Higher Education Management Statistics, or NCHEMS, as you may know them, for especially folks who are in IR and IE. Kale's 10 principles for effectively serving adults are designed to roughly encapsulate adult learners' experiences from when they enter or when they first even hear about an institution for higher education until after they complete and we're looking at success outcomes. Our principles are integrated, so they work closely together. So when we think about them, and I'll talk a little bit about what they actually are in a second, so we know the theoretical framework, these are not necessarily discrete things. We're talking about cross-functionality. We're talking about things that you do that impact adults in a number of different ways, especially advisors. And we're also talking about they're roughly indivisible. We can't talk about assessing learning outcomes without talking about faculty roles in teaching and learning. What are students learning and how are we delivering the message? And they're also imperative, they're not just a good idea. Part of what I do at Kale is I do assessment. So I assess student satisfaction and institutional effectiveness according to our 10 principles. And I find that, and I'm going to present what they are in a second, but all 10 of them are very important to adult learners near unanimously. Unless your student is an RN to BSN who's going to work at the same hospital they're at that's looking for magnet status, they're probably looking to advance in their career to a new job. And so strategic partnerships all the way through life and career planning, these things are critically important to these adults because they're looking for a better life. So the 10 principles roughly encapsulate 3 key areas. This classroom experience of adults, so this is your day-to-day. So faculty engagement is teaching and learning process. And faculty assessment and program assessment is the assessment of learning outcomes. We talk about functionalities like technology. How are you reaching your distance students through technology? How are you communicating with your adults? Are you doing it appropriately? We talk about financing, which is how are you helping adults remove barriers? We talk about so they can afford to continue at their desired pace. But also, how are you marketing financial aid? Are you even marketing financial aid at all to your adult learners? If I looked at your financial aid page and I found that the only mention of people over the age of 25 is in context of them being parents of college-age children, then you're not marketing financial aid to adults. And if your scholarships, for example, if your scholarships all say you have to be a sophomore who went to Kyoga High School, I'll just make one up, then that's not marketing to your adults because an adult might not know if they're a sophomore or not. They might not understand that 30 credits roughly equals sophomore at most schools. We talk about transitions, so how do we bring them in and how do we help them leave? We don't want them to transfer out of our 4 years, but sometimes they have to. Work and life can get in the way. A parent can get sick, a grandparent can get sick. Maybe they have a job transfer. They might have to leave us. How are we facilitating that? And outreach is all about how do we eliminate barriers in the first place, while student support systems is about how do we eliminate barriers in a more reactive manner. So we have proactive and reactive, and we need to have both. Proactive is awesome, but sometimes a student is going to come to us with something we don't expect, and how are we nimble enough to address that? Life and career planning is a big one. Life and career planning is all about how academic and career advising and how are we providing career education to adults. Finally, we have strategic partnerships, which is how are we working with folks in the community, and adaptivity, which is how nimble are we in the response for some macro calls to change, whether economic shifts or changes in the environment, changes in population booms, population shrinking, looking at fewer high school graduates. What are we going to do about that? Do we have a strategic plan in place? I'm taking an all-in class right now. It's called Managing Higher Education, and somebody in my class was just talking about how they're working at a private 4-year and they're looking at growing enrollment, and I said, oh, what have you thought about this? And she said, oh, our president said that we're not having a strategic plan anymore. We're not going to do one next year. I was sitting there like, what school is it? I know this is anonymous, but what school is this? I'm never sending a kid there. I'm never sending a niece there. You're not getting a nephew. You're not getting my next door neighbor's nephew. No! You need a strategic plan in place. Now we can get into the theoretical framework of all 10 of the principles and each of the things that Kale measures to help us understand how important these principles are and how satisfied adults are with them. But the fact is that adults consider all 10 of these functions of higher education to be very important to them. Again, like I said, unless they're there for a specific purpose that does not lead to any sort of new goal, but their employers making them do it, and you're dragging them kicking and screaming, and I come out of the healthcare industry, so I know this, that RN and BSN students are not happy if they're not getting a new job or any wage increase associated with the BSN. Just so you know, they're not thrilled. They're there for a reason, and we need to be nimble. We need to be sure that we know how to work with them. So I'm going to give some examples of some great systems that have done some work with them, once my technology works. So really, understanding these 10 principles and how they apply to your school helps us to understand the gap between how your students perceive the effectiveness of your services are and how effective you think they are. And we tend to be hard on ourselves in higher education. We are all evaluators, whether we're faculty or we're staff or we're leaders or faculty, staff leaders, you know, we're there too. We are evaluators, and understanding the student perspective can help us to understand if we're seeing our services through rose-colored glasses or if we're really just beating ourselves up. There tends to be a mix of the two, but also sometimes students and you really do see eye to eye. This is where you have those great programs that are engaged with students, always collecting feedback and making changes quickly and telling students, we made this change because of your feedback. This can help us to have a new mindset around the adults because now we've demystified who they are because we have their voices. We understand how they feel and we know what we can do to impact that over time. Here are some really cool, innovative things that have popped up in the last several years or so. I picked these logos because they were my favorite, and I love good logo. You know, we have all these great Promise programs. We have the beautifully designed Rhode Island Promise program. My cousin didn't design that or anything. We got the Chicago Star that has a little rugby ball on it, in my opinion. You know, we've got all these great things. Oregon Promise, Nevada Promise, Oklahoma Promise. Great programs that can help make college affordable for high school graduates. But we just saw a pie that had 3 million high school graduates and 36 million adults with some college and no degree. So now we have to pause and say, wait a minute. That's bullseye for some students, but that's not for all. And our students who have more barriers, our students who have failed, many of whom have failed out of higher education before, we're not even considering them in these programs. And we're saying all our profit is going to, as a state, we're going to put it toward those students who have a clearer pathway, which is good. They need a clearer pathway. Nobody is going to argue with you about making things more accessible for the traditional student. But we need to also consider post-traditional students. So we're going to talk about some great stories and best practices, and I picked some areas that are notoriously hard to serve, especially those that were impacted through the Great Recession, but even before for various reasons, which is why I'm going with Mississippi, because we love to pick on Mississippi. But Mississippi, they have 127,000 adults in that state. I think population's around, there's several million, but there's still a lot, one semester from their degree, and 32,000 adults who have enough credits already for their degree. So they just asked, how can we impact those numbers? And this brings us to our first of several modern trends in higher education, which are important, which is completion programs that allow for reverse transfers and more rigorous credit evaluations, where we're starting to look beyond the 75 credit residency requirement that you may have. Most is 45, but some have even steeper. And we're starting to look at what is important for the community that I profess to serve as a public higher education institution for the greater good. Is it that this person sits there with some debt and no degree, and some credit and no degree, or maybe we can work together to do some sort of reverse transfer process? A lot of places are doing it, but Mississippi does it well because they are doing what you are doing today, and I haven't seen at this level anywhere but Mississippi. And that's getting the 2-year institutions, the 4-year institutions, and leadership from the college board, the university board, all of you folks together in one space to talk about who are our adults and why do they matter. It happened, and it happened regularly. It happened every few months, and they traveled across that big, long state and got together and talked about their problems and came up with some solutions. They launched a statewide marketing campaign. They didn't just target individual schools and say, okay, you put your logo on the bus, and you do this and you do that. They did statewide, and their resources are statewide, so it doesn't matter where your credits come from. You can go anywhere in the state and finish. You could have gone to Delta State University and you could finish at East Mississippi Community College. And they've pulled out several hundred in the last year, have just graduated already. So for the first year they did very well, but one real success story was East Mississippi Community College. And they put in dozens through there in a very, very rural little community college out in the sticks, but they're also known as Last Chance U. So for those sports fans in the room, I watched that, and they have the reputation of being like the last school that you want to go to in the country. And they had the most comprehensive support services because they said, we don't want to be that anymore. We don't want to be Last Chance State, we don't want to be Last Chance U. So I'm always hearing great stories from them. You can look on their website, they market this program and they say, your story, your credits, your experience matter, we're going to credential that and we'll help you finish what you have to finish. Another thing that happened in Mississippi was there was some extra funding through a big old state grant that they got, big old title grant to work out this program. And what they did was they took that money as individual institutions, and when they said that that the state would not use that to eliminate micro debts that students had against the schools. So if you were $500 of debt away from paying off that last class, the schools all got together and said, we're taking that money, we're eliminating that debt with it. If you're not going to zero that out for the students, we're going to zero it out for the students. So we're going to start over and we're going to innovate around that. And that's the kind of folks that live in Mississippi, if you haven't been. They're really great folks. What happens with this? So we have the economic impact over time. Obviously, if you have an associate degree, you have a baccalaureate degree, you have You know, your labor has more value in the workplace, and there are things that open up for you. There are doors that open. So if you have someone with 95 credits and no degree, you know, you can't reverse a baccalaureate degree with that, but you might be able to get an associate, and that could open up some doors, and that can help that person get out of some jobs that are wearing them down over time. But the socioeconomic impact over time, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I always point it out, is the generational impact, to be able to, so now your child isn't necessarily going to be first to finish, but now you are, and then you can show your child you did it, but now you have a pattern that you can start sowing. You can say, you know what, mom did this, dad did this, you know, we're all doing this, you know, we failed and we picked ourselves back up and we tried again. And we reached out and we had a difficult and embarrassing conversation. Because those are not easy conversations to have. Whenever you're in a situation like that where you feel powerless, picking up that phone and saying, I need help, I'm overwhelmed, is the hardest thing you can do. But it is the most important thing you can do for yourself, especially as a student who has failed. The ease of transfer between state institutions, they just universalized it. They said there is no excuse for a public school in the state to have credits that won't transfer to another school. Even if they're not part of the same degree plan, they should be able to get credit for this. There is no reason they should be doing general education over. There is no reason they should, you know, maybe this school takes Math 101 and this one only accepts Math 102 for the Gen Ed. Why? What are the outcomes? What are we measuring here? And they made them sit down together and actually talk about it in a supervised setting and hash it out as a state. That was amazing. Because that's a really hard thing to do. We could not accomplish that in Rhode Island, and we have 3 schools. 3. The community college has 5 campuses, so they're like, oh, we're 5. So here in a thing, we have 4 principles for effectively serving adults. I did a statewide analysis down there with some colleagues on the 10 principles. We had 9 at the time. And these were the ones that emerged as challenges. And those are how they addressed it. They addressed a challenge with their transitions, transfer in, transfer out, and what do I do when I'm done, and where do I go from here? By being innovative with their technology and with their outreach. They said, there is no reason that anyone in the state of Mississippi shouldn't know about this. Put it on the news, put it on every newspaper, put it on the bus, put it wherever you have to put it, and make sure on the radio. Make sure that whatever technology they have, and they don't all have computers in states like Mississippi. They don't all have computers in any state, but especially a state like Mississippi. How do we reach them? How do we help them get to campus? How do we help them finish the degree? How do we meet them where they're at? They decided to be adaptive. They decided, we're not going to allow for these socioeconomic barriers that are in place because of an unjust system in an unjust state to prevent our adults from completing the degree. I wanted to talk about Kansas City because I'm biased toward Missouri. Actually, I wanted to talk about Kansas City because we have a similar problem here across state lines. Now, when we're talking about state lines, we're talking about state politics, and we're talking about funding, and we're talking about a whole different ballgame. Those of you who are on the state lines would know all about this down Cincinnati, Toledo, pretty close up there. I think Dayton's not too far. I'm not too familiar with Ohio. Oh yeah, east side. Dual problem. We're serving a region that crosses state lines, but also has political and economic implications. Because the health of one side is part of the health of the other side. St. Louis, where I'm at, is not like that. St. Louis, just let Illinois go. You know when you see that cousin you haven't seen in a few years, and you're like, what happened to you? But you're supposed to help family out, and Kansas City just does that a lot better. Because there are 17 institutions in 6 counties that serve about 1.6 million folks, plus 400,000 in the Kansas City metro area, and there is a Kansas City, Kansas, and a Kansas City, Missouri. There's no separate East St. Louis like we have over there. So how are we going to do that? They found foundation funding for institutions that are interested in the metro area, that don't care about the state lines. So they said, if the states aren't going to fund it, if the states are only looking at their side of the story, then we'll chase that funding on our sides of the story. We'll go after Kansas funding and Missouri funding, but what each other won't cover, we're going to go after foundation money. So they chose to use partnerships with philanthropers in order to raise money to create the KC Degrees program. And this program has done phenomenal work, especially to reconnect adults with some college credit and no degree, specifically who have children who are nearing college age. So they can do full family, go to school together, graduate together. It's been pretty cool. It's a concerted effort to address socioeconomic challenges for it's a big metro area, but it's not that big, and they have close to 400,000 folks with some college credit and no degree. That's a lot. That's like 25% of their population. That's, as we saw in our chart, that's more than usual. What did this partnership do besides impact hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of student lives in just 1 year? About 850, I think it was. We had a for-profit institution called Vatterott recently closed its doors. I don't know if Ohio had any campuses, but Missouri had several. Missouri was especially impacted by this. The Kansas City Degrees program got together with the Community College Board in the state of Missouri and came up with a transfer and action and financing plan for all adults that were affected within 3 days, 2 of which were over a weekend. And they published that on the 19th of December, the week of Christmas. They put that out there and they proactively reached out to all of them and said, this is who we are, this is what we do. We already have a program in place for adults with some college credit and no degree. They reached directly out to them and said, through our partnerships, we're using our principles now, we're able to help you transition out of this horrible, heartbreaking situation to be in. And we're adaptive. We said, you know what? We know you don't have the same kinds of credentials as those who go from the 2-year to the 4-year, who know we're used to their transcripts. We know this might look funny. We know this might not look like we expected. We know you might have credit from someplace else too. Here's how we can assess that. Here's what you can get. Here's how we can help you with paying off whatever balance you owe Vatterott, or here's how we can help you with the financial aid implications of that school closing down. And they did that together, and they got the word out in 3 days. One thing I want to point out about 3 of those schools in that program, Park University, Western Governors, they're pretty big now, and Baker University. Park University primarily serves active duty military folks. We're talking about people who could be anywhere in the world at any time, and their military-connected families. Western Governors is a fully online program that's designed to be completed at an accelerated pace, affordably, in specific majors. And Baker University is a private. I know that they're Catholic affiliated. I'm not sure if they might also be Jesuit, or they might be Franciscan actually. But they're a private 4-year. Primarily, most of their adults are graduate students. They have a lot of traditionals. All 3 of those schools led the charge together. All 3 schools competing for the same students, and they're not fighting for the students anymore. They know their niche. They have areas of competitive advantage. They have specializations. They know what they do well. And that's what they're putting out there in the world. They're saying, are you a veteran, active duty mil? Park is the right place for you. Do you live nowhere geographically near a school? Western Governors might be the right choice. Or maybe you're seeking a religious foundation in your education. There's Baker. When we look nationally, we start thinking about even bigger issues, such as we can really start thinking about equity as it addresses a specific population. So right now, Kale is doing a project with our partners Excelencia in Education regarding connecting the Hispanic-serving institutions nationally, because we want to uncover the best practices for effectively serving adult Latino students. We know the challenges that adult students face and adult Latino students, they face some of the same challenges, most of the same challenges, but there might be differences. So how can we be adaptive to a diverse adult learner population so we can reach out to more students and people that we know who may feel that college isn't for them because they don't feel represented in marketing, or they don't know success stories. How can we put the word out there together? So we also need to consider cultural frameworks. I come from a family that speaks 3 languages at the table. Some of my family are from Peru, some of my family are from Sicily, and then some of my family are just generically from the United States. I could say I call them my generic white dad. And so, I've just seen different, outcomes, different communication styles my whole life, 3 different ways of viewing the world through 3 different kinds of lenses, and I'm very happy, those are my family. But going back to school looked different for my Sicilian side of my family versus the Peruvian side of my family. It looks very, very different, especially when you have cultural knowledge and cultural base, and the history, the language, the culture, the religion, the faiths, the economical stories, even the children's lit of another country. But how do you translate that into United States credentials? And why aren't we credentialing that? So, that's college level knowledge for some of these folks. Why aren't we talking about this? We need to consider principle-driven best practices, and we cannot omit different groups of students. We cannot be focusing on just single parents, for example. If we're not talking about also single widow parents, or maybe we're not talking about the veterans, or maybe we're not talking about adults with disabilities and how can they access our services. Here are some other schools that have done some principle-driven best practices, and maybe I went a little haywire with the logos here, so I'm going to translate. Rio Salado College in the Southwest has done 40 flexible start dates for their courses. So what that means is that you can join into any section that starts at a specific point, and then as long as you do 16 weeks in the class, it doesn't matter if you start in September, August, October, November, as long as you finish X number of credits in X amount of time. So they can overlap in certain ways but not others. It's a little bit complicated, but that level of flexibility sounds like a financial aid nightmare. So they put some very strict restrictions on the number of credits you can take and when, but they allow for adults to take breaks when they need to. So if you're having a kid, you don't have to worry about, you can plan for the 6, 8, 12, 16 weeks off in advance, and you can say, you never know when that baby's gonna come. It could come out 2 weeks late, and there you go. So you gotta be careful with that. But it's a level of flexibility that shows that they're willing to meet adults where they're at, no matter where they're at. And then we have Excelsior College, our friends on the other side of the lakes. They accept up to 117 transfer credits. So we have to think about how we're assessing prior learning for credit and what that means. What's the end game? Is the completion what we're looking at? Is that the metric we're looking to move? Or is it number of credits taken at my institution? And where is the balance between the two? What is strategically best? Should have a strategic plan in place. Don't be like that school in Massachusetts, I don't know which. Park University, the thing about them, I love Park University because your military, active duty military, they structure their deadlines and their courses so that way you don't have to log in on Monday and use Blackboard because Monday might be Tuesday in the Philippines. You can do it within 72, 96 hours chunks of time, and they allow you to take time away for moving. They have support services in place to help military-connected children and parents, so you're the spouse of active duty military, to be connected with each other and to support each other through these situations. So they actively facilitate those counselor-driven programs, so you can sit down and talk to someone who's experiencing the same struggle as you. And then Kennesaw State University, I chose this one to have toward the end because Kennesaw State has done something amazing. Anyone who's been higher ed for a long time has probably seen a few forced marriages between institutions, and it's not cute. When two institutions who have very different purposes come together because the state board has decided you two will become one. Kennesaw State Research 4-year institution, Southern Polytechnic State Institute, very adult-friendly, career technical education program. They said, you're going to become one school now, and that's going to become Kennesaw State Marietta Campus. Marietta. So the folks there decided, they had, not in the face of that whole Kennesaw 5 scandal, where they lost the president and some of their board, they decided, we're not going to take on this adult learner campus and call it what it is. We're going to use our best practices from there, and we're going to duplicate those supports and bring them to our students at our main campus, because these are about a 40-minute drive away. So why are we siloing our adults over here? Maybe it's best to have certain programs housed over here because of technology reasons. Engineering, welding, all these things for certificates. It's great to have the equipment where it is, but why is it only students there can access the career advising office after 5? And why is it that financial aid isn't often at the main campus a little later? Because it's not just the people who live in between, but also the people who live in the region. We have all these great programs. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Schaefer from Graduate. I'm really excited to hear about what she has to say about her leadership in this. Because we have all these great complete the program, reverse transfer, back to school things happening all around the country. It's very cool. I'm really excited. Tennessee Reconnect, is a statewide one. We have Greater Cleveland College now, so we're not total strangers. And I love these logos. We've got Southern Indiana, they pulled that one. The New Mexico one in the top right is my favorite. Just looks like a dive bar. I'm like, all right. So what is next for Ohio? First of all, y'all need a good logo. I recommend, hiring someone in the state of Ohio to do that. If you don't, like Rhode Island did, it's gonna blow up. And they're gonna blame the governor. Depending on if you like your governor. We want to impact this number. We want to impact this some college, no degree number. We want to leverage Complete College Ohio when we can. And maybe we want to look at that greater Cleveland. Maybe we want to look and see what they're doing there and see what we can duplicate. We don't necessarily, I'm not saying, everything that one person does is going to fit for all. But we have more options than what we're working with. And Kale is here to be a partner in all this. We're here to help you bounce ideas off. We're here to facilitate this great network of folks who are all outstanding professionals in higher education, just talking about how to serve the post-traditional learner. And understanding that it's not going to work for some, it's not going to work for all, but it should work for most. And then once we've got it working for most, let's make sure that no one else slips through the gaps ever again. So we're going to have some growing pains. It's not going to be simple. It's never simple to institute a change like this. But that's why we're together. That's why we're not giving you a handout and saying, go do it on your own. That's why I don't just have a list of 10 principles on here and say study, and there'll be a test at the end of the day. All right. That's about pretty much where I'm at, other than just want to broadly say that it's really inspiring to see so many folks come together who really care about moving the needle on adult student success. Because when you fail, failing hurts. Failing is the worst feeling in the world. Failing comes with debt, failing comes with shame, failing comes with anyone and everyone you ever knew saying you should go to college, and you've just let them down, whether they're alive or they're gone. And, to pick yourself back up, school, we need to be receptive and, say, this is a safe space to stumble. Maybe you'll still withdraw from a class at some point, or maybe you'll take a D in your history class. We don't want them to do that at all, but, maybe it's going to happen. And we don't want this to happen, but we want to give students options, to put it in their hands and say, tutoring's available for you. Mentors are available for you. The career office wants what's best for you. And even if you think these services are just for the traditional student, they're really not. The professionals there are trained to help you. They're available, your mentor knows who they are, and they'll point you in the right direction. We don't want you to go wrong. Because it affects our bottom line too, so it makes strategic sense. We don't want our schools to suffer and lose out on funding opportunities because we let 1.2 million people slip through the cracks. No more. It's never going to be that high again, starting today. That's what I got. Did we have any questions?